Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast. I am your co-host, Thomas Vick, joined by our co-host, Seth Wilson. Seth, how's it going today?
Thomas, I'm doing great. We are just enjoying this beautiful summer weather and getting ready for back to school time, finishing up packing and, school supply lists and looking at clothes and all that stuff around the house, making sure the kids are ready to get back into the swing of things here in a few weeks.
Yeah, my little one starts this coming Monday, so it's going to be right around the corner, starting a little bit earlier than usual this year. So yeah, we're right there with it, with you on that, getting ready for school. So back to school things. In times past, we've kind of talked about substantive legal topics, this time of year, what to do with, college kids going to college for the first time, power of attorneys, things like that. That should be in place for 18-year-olds. So I encourage people to go back to the library of our past podcasts and search for that and take a look at what people need to be thinking about. And of course, we've kind of redirected our focus to law office management and how we can help lawyers launch their law firms and how we can assist solo and small firm attorneys in their law practice and just how we can constantly be improving our day-to-day operation in the law firm. And I thought, as suggested by you, we would talk a little bit about how we keep track of cases coming in and our productivity, and how are we making sure that people are getting tasks completed and things like that. So I wanted to open up the conversation and let you kind of lead the way here for us.
The topic came to mind as we were talking about kind of that back to school time, and the school will send out a school supply list, or you'll have a syllabus to review, and that will lay out the next several weeks worth of work and understanding. And so I'm always thinking about that in terms of kind of that personal productivity model of what we do to manage all of the things that are coming our direction. And I know we've talked in the past a little bit about kind of the checklists and processes and those kind of things. And those are, I think, kind of a result of the thinking that we've completed or gone through on multiple occasions. But I thought it'd be good for us to kind of share a little bit about what are some of the practical day to day things based on maybe the type of input or the tool, if you will, that brings that inputs. Maybe let's start with kind of the phone calls, because that's one that's fairly prevalent in the lawyer's life cycle, if you will, is we get phone calls, and hopefully that phone is ringing relatively consistently. At first, maybe not, but as time goes on, that's going there. Either that's a new client potentially calling in, or an existing client, or the court, or opposing counsel, or something like that. Kind of walk us through, Thomas, what's your process for capturing the results of those phone calls?
Yeah, for a prospective client that's never called the office before, our first step is to enter them into our CRM database. I think, what is it, Customer Relations Management? Is that what CRM stands for? And we use Lawmatics for that process. So we always take down their name, their email address, phone number, street address. We want to have that information so that we know how to get in contact with them. And then we make notes based upon that initial phone call, what the matter is about, what's the practice area that it might be related to. And then, if we've scheduled an appointment, we put the appointment into our CRM, and then we've got it synced to our calendars. Everybody knows that appointment is going to happen. So that's kind of the first thing that happens whenever we have a phone call from a prospective new client.
Is that something that you do electronically only, or are you capturing any of that information on paper and translating it later?
That basic information, I think it probably is different depending on the person in the law firm, and it might be how many windows you have open right now on your computer. But for me, I always put it into the computer directly. I don't make a note and write it down and then come back to the Lawmatics page to put it in. maybe on occasion I've done that, but as a practice, I don't. It's just easier to just have the client wait a little bit longer. That actually brings up a point that I've thought of in the past. When a client calls an attorney, that's a nerve-wracking thing for them. And maybe they've never called an attorney's office before, so they don't really know what to expect. You answer the phone, means, you say, I'm Thomas Vick, how can I help you? And then they just launch into everything that's going on with their matter. And I let them just kind of go through that. And then I come back to them and I say, okay, well, can I get your contact information? Before we even start talking about the 5-minute phone call that they just had with me, we're going to get contact information. You really got to have that. So many people will say, I'm just going to call the attorney's office real quick, get a quick answer, and then I'm going to be done. Well, you really need that. You need their contact information, for ethical compliance reasons, but also from, a business standpoint. You got to be able to follow up with these people. So don't just answer their questions without getting their name and their contact information. And so I do that. And I think that when I'm taking down their contact information, I feel like they relax a little bit. They know how to give me contact information, and then they can kind of see some hear some friendliness in my voice or in my paralegal's voice. And then they're a little bit more at ease, and then they're ready to either talk about the situation or schedule an appointment. And that makes it a lot easier. So that's sort of the system. And I think it's really important to get that contact information.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point because if you've ever done any litigation at all, one of the first parts of a deposition is usually kind of name and biographical information to allow the witness a little bit of a chance to let off some of the nerves that may be there and answer questions that are very familiar to them. Yes, I know my phone number, or I know my email address, or those kind of things. And I think that's a really important point from a client service standpoint of allowing them to get the initial conversation started and then say, okay, that's great. Hold on just a second. Let's kind of start here and go through our process. And, if you've listened to our podcast for any amount of time, we like these processes because they help us gather the information we need to get consistent outputs. And that's a really important thing. That's kind of why I asked that question on the paper versus computer and how that happens, because everyone does handle their own methodology a little bit differently. But ultimately, what we want to make sure is from a firm perspective that the result of that capture is now input into the system, however that gets there. So if you're a paper and a pen kind of person, like you like legal pads and you want to just write those things down, what's the process from legal pad to the CRM if that's the intended outcome, or the case management system? And you can argue over which is more efficient or which is more effective, right? So it may not be as efficient to handwrite things, but maybe your brain processes better by using pen and paper. And if that's the case, and you're going to be able to better serve your client by using that tool set and maybe scanning those notes in later and making them a part of the electronic file, or using voice to text dictation to enter that into the computer rather than trying to type it up, or having someone transcribe it for you, all of those are acceptable. You just kind of have to measure what makes you more effective, and don't focus solely anyway on the most efficient manner, because I can take a lot of notes by typing, but that doesn't mean I'm interacting with the information and really wrestling with what that is. And so that's a big key. I think another big point there too, Thomas, is you want to make sure that you get that information entered accurately into the computer system. Because if you transpose a number or don't type the email address incorrectly, now you've potentially duplicated that error throughout the case until that gets fixed. So you got to make sure it's in. So if you're trying to concentrate to what's being said on the phone and type and get all the information in, sometimes that you got to recognize your own propensities there and make sure that you're not getting bad information put into the system just so you can be faster. Again, it's that effectiveness equation.
Yeah, and how conversational can you be during this initial interaction, or maybe even a subsequent appointment that you have with the client? You got to be conversational, and if it takes 10 minutes or whatever to pull up Lawmatics to enter in the contact information, well, you're not giving the client a good first impression, and so you've got to keep that in mind as well. And I think it's a good point that you bring up. You need to take notes in the best way to, that you can interact with the client. Sometimes if you're stuck behind a laptop or, some kind of tablet, there's not as much face-to-face interaction between you and the client, and maybe they don't feel as comfortable with you if you're taking notes on the computer that way. Um, and I've actually been a little bit more cognizant of that in times past. I've been more likely to just type my notes into the computer, but it seems like if I take notes with pen and ink and paper, I'm going to be more likely to make eye contact with the client and be more conversational. And I think I do that because I've started to use voice to text dictation with my notes, and with some of the new technologies that are out there with Clio. And so that makes it a lot easier and quicker, honestly, to be able to get that information into the computer, get my notes into the computer. So yeah, that's a great point. Use voice to text if you're going to take notes. That's a good takeaway for people.
Yeah, and another, I think to piggyback on what you were saying there, I like to use the tool that helps me best interact with the client. And so a lot of times, if I bring a laptop into that meeting, it changes the dynamic of the meeting. Where if I bring in a tablet with a pencil, like I use an Apple's pencil with an iPad, and I can keep that kind of off the table and still do handwritten digital notes, if you will, but there's no barrier between myself and the client on the other side of the table. There's no screen that's kind of dividing the room. And I always kind of joke with my clients, if we're using a laptop in a meeting because we're reviewing documents on a larger screen behind me or something, is, hey, I'm not playing video games here. You see what I see on the screen, and, just kind of use it to recognize that there are some inherent limitations to the computer world that we live in. There's some great aspects of it, but a lot of times, especially on that in-person scenario, having that connection is the most human connection you will have with them. A lot of the other interactions are going to be by telephone or by email or something else. And so that's your one opportunity to really start developing that relationship with them and understanding their needs and their concerns, and then being able to respond to those better. And once they've got that human touch and understanding, then you can utilize the other tools a little bit more effectively then. But I think that initial interaction is really important to remove any barriers are there. And sometimes I won't even open up the notebook or bring in a pen and paper until we've talked for a little while. And then I say, hey, do you mind if I take some notes? And that's when I'll kind of start my interview part.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really good stuff. Let's kind of move the conversation forward a little bit. Let's say that we've gotten the client into the office and they've hired us. The next step is, how do we keep track of the file? What are some of the systems that should be put into place, or maybe are suggested or recommended ways to keep track of the file once the client has hired us?
Yeah, and I think we've kind of talked around this a little bit in terms of the matter management that's available in the practice management software that you and I both use, which is Clio Manage. And that software is built to help you do matter management. And so a matter is simply just that particular case that you may be working on. And you can set up one matter and handle a lot of different things underneath it, or you could set up multiple matters for that client to handle separate parts of the representation. So let's say on an estate plan, for an example, you're drafting a will and a power of attorney, but you're also going to prepare a deed later on in the representation. Maybe you track the estate plan as one part of that and the deed as another. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, just as an example. And so that matter then can collect information and relate information specific to that matter. So when you have a phone call with the client, you can make a phone record and track that information inside of that matter and find all of that in one place. You can save all the emails from the client relating to that matter to the matter and go see that on the communication tab. You track all your billing. And I think importantly for matter management is your calendar and the related tasks that you can utilize. So in our system, we utilize our tasks as sort of our internal communication tool using Clio Task and its description field. And so what we'll do is write out sort of the billable entry as the name of the task. So prepare the deed in the example we were talking about. And then in the description, which is just a text box, we will utilize a date stamp, if you will, and our initials, and then we'll write out the next steps. And Clio just recently, in the last, 6-8 months, released some more rich text formatting options in the tasks and text fields throughout the system. So you can put numbered lists or bullet lists or bold and italics and those kind of things. So you can write out sort of a step-by-step of what you need to do to accomplish that one billing entry of prepare the deed. And then you can assign that to different people in the office. And so we use that text box area as our communication. And then we'll assign that to whoever is responsible for the next step. Then they'll make a note and reassign it back to us. So we don't ever complete it until we've actually moved that all the way through the stages. And that's sort of those one-off or special circumstances that we don't already have a checklist for. So that's one way we use the internal system of Clio to kind of communicate back and forth on specific projects to complete within that matter.
Very good stuff. I use it in a very similar way as far as the tasks are concerned. I don't use the phone logs as much. I tend to use notes for phone calls and making notes with that feature. But yeah, great ways of handling a matter within Clio Manage. Another feature of Clio is that you have matter stages, which is something that I've started to use in the last year. You can design the stages. You mentioned that you might have a practice area that is specifically for preparation. And you could set up, for example, matter stages that say, okay, I need to get a copy of the last deed. So maybe acquire deed is the first stage. And then stage 2 is draft the deed. Stage 3 is attorney approval. Stage 4 is ready for signing. And you can track the stage all through that process, and it gives you a visual of actually where you are in all these different matters within the deed preparation practice area. Estate planning works very similarly. In drafting pleadings, it's a little bit similar. With our estate administration work, we have similar stages that are designated. And from a managing attorney's perspective, I love being able to have a bird's eye view, And one thing about the stages is that you're able to know how long a matter has been in the stage. So at the bottom right-hand corner, it'll say, okay, this matter has been in, acquire the deed stage for 35 days. Well, there's probably something wrong if it's been there for 35 days. We need to push it forward somehow. We got to get some tasks accomplished before we do that, so that we can move it to the next stage. So that's one way that we keep track of our files. And at our weekly meetings, that's what we do. We go through the stages, and if a matter has not been moved over and it needs to be, that's a great time for us to do that and make sure that we're accurate with each matter and where it is in the pipeline, so to speak. And you could develop that with a different kind of law practice management program, or it isn't necessarily tied to law practice management. There are a lot of different programs out there, but I think it's just so important. I used to have just a big long Microsoft Word chart for every single matter, and it was cumbersome to say the least. And we became more reliant on the Microsoft Word task list than the Clio task list. And we really wanted to be more centered on Clio so that we can take advantage of the technologies and the efficiencies that come along with that. So that's the way that we track the life cycle of a particular case in my firm.
That's a great distinction because each of us sort of have our own preferred method of working, as we talked about earlier. And so when you think about okay, I like to do things this way, but that doesn't involve our practice management software, you got to balance those two features or opportunities, if you will, against each other and see which or a combination of actually is the most effective for you in your practice. And what I've come to find over time is the more I can keep things in Clio, the better it is for everyone. Because if I step out of the office for some reason, could be a client emergency, could be a family situation, it could be any number of reasons, whoever else who is already using our system can step into my shoes, so to speak, and look at things and understand where they are. And if I have my own personal system that sort of helps me manage everything else that's going on, and I don't get that into the firm related system, that can create that tension. And I think as you grow into the practice management tool that you choose to use, you hit that tilt over point. At some point, the scale starts tilting in favor of maximizing or learning a different way of doing things because of the efficiencies that are gained that ultimately make you more effective. And so I think the way you think about things is great because it's so neat to see that no matter your personal approach to something, you can sort of set up the tool to match that and help you feel peace of mind that you have everything reviewed, everything current, and a plan of action for the next step in the process. And those matter stages are great. I think it's the Kanban philosophy. They're the boards, if you will. I think Trello was kind of one that really made that available to a wide audience early on and still one of the most commonly used app in that space. But it's the same kind of process where you can take the matter and drag it from one stage to another across a process from left to right. And the last stage is complete or done or whatever it is. And it then drops off of your list. And Clio has great tools built into that so that if you move a matter from one stage to another, you can use Clio's automation to assign task lists associated with that matter. And those are some cool things that you can do as you get more familiarity with your process and have that written out and a good understanding of these are the three things that always need to happen in this stage. And here's who in the office is primarily responsible for handling it. And it's pretty cool then because you can add metadata into the tasks and say, now here's an estimated duration. So if you're training a new staff member and they receive, call the county office and get the parcel number or whatever it may be, they'll know that should be a point two, a 12-minute to 15-minute project or something like that. And it may take them 45 minutes the first time, but they get better over time and they know that's sort of the expected time to get there. And then you've thought about that once, set it up, you don't have to think about it anymore, except for when you need to go back and go, why did I do it this way again? So leave yourself some notes there to say, oh, this is what I was thinking in 2025 about this particular process. And then we changed everything in August of 2025, and now that's irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good to put those processes into place, think through it one time, and then get it automated so that you don't have to think about it again. You'll be thinking about other things, other ways that you can improve your firm, and you're just going to continue to build upon that. week after week, month after month. And that's really how you improve your law firm over the course of time. You're not going to open up a law firm and everything's in place. As much as people want to say it, being a law office owner is not a turnkey operation. You might buy a practice, but even then, you're going to have to figure out the processes that they have in place, and they probably won't fit exactly what you want if you were to buy a law firm. So you just have to build these law office processes little by little, gain traction, utilize the football philosophy of 1% better every day. That's how you'll get better over time.
Yeah. So as we end today, Thomas, what do you do? And I'm just curious about this because I've got my own methods, and you and I were talking just before we started recording that I'm always changing my methods and trying to figure out the best way to do things. Just that's my personality. I love doing that, and so I'll try something, and yeah, this didn't work or that did work, and I'll adjust it. But so as an example, you're dropping your child off at school, and somebody stops you in the hall and says, "Hey, I have a legal matter to discuss with you." What do you do in that moment to capture that information, make sure that you don't forget to get back in touch with them? What are some of the tools that you use, and what do you carry with you every day to help you with that?
My cell phone is my best resource when it comes to that. Somebody talks to me just offhand at a social event, kids' school or something like that, I'll send myself an email. And that email will be something that I check later on in the day, maybe, the next day. And then that will be my reminder that I need to start the process of opening up a new matter for that particular person. So that's one thing that I do. I also might, I've got a prospective new client matter in Clio. So I might go to the Clio app and add a task within that prospective new client matter. And it'll say, well, follow up with John Smith. And then I'll follow up, and create the Lawmatics intake and all of that I need to the following day. That's usually how I handle it. Needs some kind of reminder, it's something that you're going to look at later on. If I don't do it in the moment, I will forget it and I'll feel bad about it. I won't mean to do it, but it'll happen. I will forget. So you've got to have some kind of tick.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And one thing that I found as, life has gotten busier and I've gotten older is I'll go, and if I try to open up the Clio app or an email, by the time I get to the app or whatever it is, I've forgotten what I was trying to capture. So one thing that I do is I use an app on the iPhone called Drafts, which is you hit the button and you have a cursor and you can start typing or dictating right away into that. And so I'll use that as a way to capture whatever's on my mind at that moment. And then I'll sort through those notes, on a daily basis and get them moved to where they need to go. So I call that the capture piece. And then I'll go back and organize them later where it needs to go and then process that so I can execute on it later. So that's how I cope with things. That COPE is capture, organize, process it, and then execute on whatever needs to be done.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm sure that Google Pixel has something like that, but I haven't found it yet, or I'm not using it. May have to check that out one of these days.
So good stuff today, Thomas. We are the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast, and we are really focused on helping lawyers launch. Thomas, where can folks go to hear more about what we have to offer?
Well, you're on the YouTube page, probably, if you're looking at this. So go to YouTube and search for Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast and hit subscribe so that you get, all the updates, all the new posts about law office management for solo and small firm attorneys. And then check out all the different outlets for podcasts. So encourage everybody to check those out.
Well, thanks, Thomas. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Seth.